Do you want to start the meeting?
I can start the meeting. I don't even have an agenda in front of me tonight, but
Approval of the minutes.
all right. Calling to order the Climate Action Plan Committee agenda for May 23rd. We have minutes that went out from April 4th. And any comments or changes? If there are none, then we will put them on file. Thank you. So we're looking to appoint a chair for the committee. Do I have a nomination?
I nominate Stephen Brown.
Any second?
Second.
Are there any other nominations? Then all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed?
Steve, you can
Steve.
oppose.
Steve?
Steve.
No, I'm fine. I'm fine. I'm not opposed.
Yeah.
All right, you're elected. That means I can turn it over to you. It's yours now.
Thank you. And Nick and I talked a little bit before, and because I'm remote today, my son tested positive for COVID this morning. We thought it might just be a little bit easier for meeting management if someone in the room was chairing. So I'm turning it over to Nick.
Great, thank you.
So now, like, our next item is MAPC.
MAPC.
And so Sasha, I think we'll turn it over to you. Thank you for coming tonight. And Francelis, thank you as well. And if you can just take us through the slides, that would be great. And for our discussion earlier today, I think that if you go through the slides and folks write down their questions, and then at the end of that presentation, we can return to any slides you want to ask questions about.
Yeah, thank you. Can everyone see the slides and hear me okay?
Yep, perfectly.
Okay, great. Yes, we decided, since it's a hybrid meeting, that we'll wait to do sort of questions and discussion at the end. I think our presentation will be about 15 to 20 minutes. And I appreciate the remote option, as my family is also just getting over COVID, no longer contagious, but still in recovery. I'm Sasha Scheideroff. I'm a senior clean energy and climate planner at MAPC. Just a way of background. We are the Metropolitan Area Planning Council. We are a quasi-state agency. As a regional planning agency, we serve 101 municipalities in the greater Boston region, which represents over 3.2 million residents. So some of our densest communities in this state. We are one of 13 RPAs across the state and provide regional planning, guidance, technical assistance, and a whole lot of other services to our communities, of which Needham is one. Our clean energy department is a little over 10 years old, and we focus on a variety of clean energy planning services. So we work on regional based projects. We have done a lot of work with the state on LED streetlight retrofit programs. In the past, we've done support and regional procurements around solar energy, as well as ESCOs, municipal aggregation, green mobility and EVs, and energy resilience. Some of the other services that we provide and work on are around energy and climate baselining, planning and strategizing. So doing things like net zero and climate plans, connecting municipalities with incentives and other programs, and helping with outreach and education. And then we also do a lot of grant writing, local policy and permitting and zoning work, as well as do advocacy around state policy as well. And then also green community support, which is what we'll also be talking about today. So Metro Common, which was recently approved, is our regional plan that MAPC operates under and helps guide our region. And there are several climate-related strategies and goals within that. So preparing Metro Boston for the impacts of climate change, becoming a more energy efficient and reducing greenhouse gases, and then focusing also on creating healthy environments. I think this slide I should have put first, but again, I'm Sasha. I'm a senior clean energy and climate planner, and I'm joined by my colleague Franceli Suarez, who's a clean energy and climate fellow. And today, after conversations, particularly with Hank, we decided to cover two sort of main buckets. One is the municipal net zero operations project that we are currently funded to do through the Green Communities program, and talk a little bit about what is included in that project that we'll be doing with Needham. And then, because you all are undergoing your climate action planning process, wanted to share a bit about some of the tools and resources and frameworks that MAPC has developed and worked on for municipalities within our region. And then we'll have time for discussion and next steps. So this first section, I'm going to focus on what we're currently working on, which is the municipal net zero operations. This is a project that is funded under the Green Communities program, and specifically under their REPA grant. So in the Green Communities designation program, for those of you who may not be familiar, it's run by the state's Department of Energy Resources and provides funding for municipalities to implement energy conservation measures to reach a 20% energy reduction goal. And under the program, in addition to the grant funding, they supply directly to municipalities to do the energy efficiency work. They also provide grants to the regional planning agencies like MAPC to provide technical assistance for communities. And this is the first year that Green Communities has included some net zero planning and assessment work within their REPA grants, including a net zero municipal operations. I will say that Green Communities as a program focuses just on municipal energy use and not community-wide energy use. So municipal buildings, including schools, but also things like vehicles and your fleet, water and sewer, and street lights. So again, just as background, Needham was designated in early 2020. I believe you submitted for designation in 2019. And so your baseline year is 2018. A lot of the energy use across open space, streetlights, vehicles, and water and sewer has gone down since the baseline year, but building energy usage is up. I'm not going to go, I think that Cecilia will probably have the best sense of the specific data. I just pulled this from your annual report. And then some of the top municipal building energy users include the high school, the middle school, the elementary schools, and the Charles River Pump Station, although I know that there's a lot of planned energy conservation measures at these buildings as well. So what we were specifically granted funding for from DOER is to work with the town of Needham to develop a what we're calling a municipal net zero operations project. So, and again, this is the first year that Green Communities has been funding these types of things. So it's a little bit of a pilot, but it's basically to work with you all to help develop recommended strategies and opportunities to bring municipal operations to net zero. So again, including these categories like municipal buildings, municipal vehicles, water and sewer, and then looking for opportunities for on-site clean energy and renewable energy generation. And as part of that, we'll be developing a GHG inventory based on the data that is already in Mass Energy Insight. This is a little bit about our timeline. So right now we have been, we'll be working with Hank and Cecilia as we launch this project, sort of spring to early summer, to form an advisory working group, most likely with different municipal staff and different departments that might touch upon green communities work, and then complete our municipal level greenhouse gas inventory, come up with draft recommendations, get review and feedback, and then do a final plan and presentation sometime in the fall. So we have questions and some discussion stuff for the end, but that is what we're currently working on with the town of Needham. But Hank also wanted us to present on some of the resources for community-wide net zero and climate action planning as well. So under the Green Communities program, we'll be focusing just on municipal energy use, but what I'm going to talk about now kind of encompasses things that can be used community-wide. So this is just a snapshot. A lot of communities are working or have worked recently on net zero and climate action plans. This slide is a little bit outdated. It's from 2020, but 26 municipalities have or are developing climate action plans. 34 municipalities have adopted goals to reduce greenhouse gas emissions community-wide, and 66 municipalities have some sort of volunteer committee, just like you all, dedicated to climate, sustainability, or energy issues. And I'm sure that all of these numbers are probably higher in the last 2 years of work. So when we talk about net zero, we think about a holistic framework that includes not just our municipal buildings, but also things like existing buildings within your community, new construction, transportation and mobility, waste, renewable energy, and also carbon offsets. When we think about how net zero is really about netting and zeroing out your energy use. And when we talk about net zero community planning, we're thinking not just of a net zero building, which the true definition is that it produces as much energy as it uses. We think about community-wide scale, also producing as much energy as it uses and through clean energy sources, and netting out any of the remainder. So I think this little graph kind of shows trying to balance out, the energy we use with both thinking about emissions removal, but also like energy efficiency, and then clean energy. And, I think trees are in there for carbon capture, but sort of thinking about how do we balance out the emissions that we're creating community-wide with energy efficiency and clean energy. So several years ago, because we saw communities were starting to do climate action plans and setting net zero goals, MAPC got a grant from the state to work with a couple communities to work on our net zero playbook and develop climate action plans. So we worked with the town of Arlington, town of Natick, and city of Melrose in developing their net zero action plans, and through that work started to develop these planning frameworks. So we have 2 frameworks that are available on our website and are really supposed to be a guide for communities that are interested in doing this work, whether they're working with us or another consultant or going at it on their own with their volunteers and with their staff. So we have a framework for action as well as a framework for equity. In the action section, we have 4 different chapters. So we have a chapter that focuses on emissions from mobility and transportation, net zero buildings, clean energy supply, and then also climate smart zoning and permitting and things that can be done at a policy level. Yeah, and then just a little bit about our framework too, really trying to think of it holistically. So, and also thinking about what types of community engagement are needed. So garnering support from the community, getting to some sort of commitment that the select board or city council would be pursuing, and then doing the planning and data analysis work as well. And really thinking about the different sectors. So again, not just thinking about net zero buildings, but the sort of costs and benefits around energy usage, economic benefits, environmental benefits, and public health benefits of moving towards net zero. I am going to turn it over to Francelis to talk a little bit about the equity framework and then our GHG inventory tool.
Thanks, Sasha. Yeah, so here we wanted to highlight centering equity. So in the graphic, you can see the process for creating a net zero plan or a climate action plan, starting with budgeting, scoping, and ending with the communication of the plan once it's developed. And so during this process, we can work to implement equity at every stage. So for example, in our budgeting and scoping, we can include funds for translation and interpretation services, and we can also make it so that a good portion of the funding is going towards community engagement and outreach. And then another example is for like stakeholder engagement. We can collaborate with local community organizations to bring hard to reach and highly impacted groups of residents to the table, and also to go to their tables that are already set to get more context on the challenges they're experiencing, how they have been dealing with those challenges, and also just to learn more about their priorities. So I think, for example, MAPC has done this by compensating stakeholders through community engagement mini grants for the Metro Common 2050 plan engagement that was occurring before the launch. And one way that communities who have done net zero action plans or climate action plans have done this is by providing gift cards to participants as well. And so they kind of scope that amount into their budgeting and scoping so that they have those funds set aside to be able to do that. And for selection of actions or for policy creation, we can prioritize the voices of groups that have already been or will be impacted disproportionately with regards to climate change in their communities. And I think in addition to these examples that I've kind of gone through, the framework for equity document developed by MAPC, which we will be sharing with you as well through links, will include other examples of what implementing equity can look like at each step of the planning process. Next slide. Thank you. And as part of centering equity in this process, we highlight an equity assessment as a best practice. And so for each strategy in the climate action plan, it's good to answer who has been historically impacted, who will be most impacted by the types of changes to our climate we expect to see, and how will the benefits of the strategy be distributed. And so this kind of just allows us to always be thinking about equity and the impact that strategies and projects, initiatives, or policies, et cetera, that come from those strategies and those recommendations may have on folks in the community, especially those who have been most often left out of the conversation. Next. And now kind of moving on to MAPC's greenhouse gas inventory tool. We have here on the left is an example of where we have our step-by-step guide to help folks navigate the spreadsheet and the tool, which is what's on the right, as well as some other additional resources that we'll share at the end. And this data just usually helps municipalities see which sectors are higher emitting in their communities, kind of to get a snapshot to see where they should kind of, or to help when creating strategies relating to lowering their emissions, for example. And so what is a greenhouse gas inventory? So here we kind of have a basic definition. So a GHG inventory accounts for the emissions resulting from a defined geographic area, whether that be the border of your city or town, the state, the region, et cetera, in a given year. And when creating a GHG inventory, usually the three primary greenhouse gases that make up the carbon equivalents are carbon dioxide, methane, and nitrous oxide, which are the ones that there's like a primary interest in. And then there are a few more that the global protocol includes that are sometimes considered, which are PFCs, HFCs, SF6, and NF3. And so for MAPC's greenhouse gas inventory tool specifically, it was created to support a 2017 baseline year, though there is a feature in the tool that allows communities to adjust the inventory year if they'd like their baseline year to be either earlier or later on from 2017. And the tool mostly leverages data from the community, so such as data from like Mass Energy Insight, if the municipality is a green community, which Needham is, as well as like public data sets from sources such as Mass Save or the US Census. And so the tool itself kind of focuses on three sectors, as you can see here. So stationary energy, transportation, and waste, which are then divided into subsectors, such as like residential energy or on-road vehicles, or like solid waste. And in the tool, there are some optional sources to track. So there's like privately hauled waste, if that pertains to your community or any of the other ones listed on here. So there's room to place these in the tool, but it isn't mandatory to have them in there if the data is either difficult to collect or if it doesn't pertain to your community. And then there are some emission sources that are not included in the tool, however. So some of those are like agricultural or fishing activity emissions or water transportation, such as ferries or industrial waste in the community. And then here's a slide with all the resources on the tool itself. We have a GHG inventory virtual training that's, I believe, a couple hours long, which is really helpful and also highlights a case study that when Arlington did their tool, and they had a lot of like great learnings in there as well. And then we have like the guide and a lot of other documents that are helpful and online resources. And then in addition to those, we have a page on the Municipal Net Zero Playbook where you can find the different sections for like clean energy or mobility and such, and the different framework for action and equity. And those include a lot of like the best practices we noted tonight and other resources. And then there are also links on here to climate action plans, which was Arlington's, which I believe Sasha noted, and the city of Cambridge's. And then here we have some potential funding sources for funding the plan for the town through like state grants and such. And then there are also some MAPC funding that we noted on there as well that might be helpful for when you're trying to get some funding to start. Yeah, and now I'll turn it back to Sasha.
Yeah, so that was a lot. I realized, especially without pausing for questions, we went through a lot of information. So I'm just gonna first quickly share some of the questions that we wanted to discuss, but then also open up to you all. So as we were thinking about the current project under the municipal net zero operations, there are a couple things that I think align with the community-wide planning process as well. So thinking about how does Needham define net zero? What time scale are you planning towards? And what are some of the interim or near-term timelines or scales that would be most useful? And then things like how high is the priority for on-site energy generation for your net zero goals? So basically like on municipal property, energy based in Needham, Massachusetts energy supply. Some communities also, like if they're purchasing renewable energy credits or energy supply from out of state, want to still prioritize New England or sort of regional energy. And then how might your committee and the CAPC align and coordinate with some of the municipal net zero operations process. Obviously we're working with Hank and Cecilia, but does it make sense to have another representative from your group engaged? Ideally we'll share drafts with you all, and would love to get feedback, but thinking about how the processes can align with each other. So I'm going to just quickly stop sharing my screen. And I can't quite see, like the people in the big room are very tiny. So whoever's facilitating in the room will have to help, I think, figure out who has questions and such, because I can't actually see well enough. So I think we'll just pause there and see first if anyone has either clarifying questions or things that they want to ask.
Question?
Okay.
Question. How is the energy being used in the open space being defined? It says, you said something about energy being used in open space. How is that being defined?
Yes, so so under Green Communities, we use a platform called Mass Energy Insight. And so communities will enter their energy usage data there, as well as link it to their gas and electricity. So oftentimes it is, if you have a field that has like a lot of floodlight, like a sports field with floodlights, or some communities might have like a rec center or like a public beach that has some energy use associated with it. So that is usually what gets counted in the open space category.
It's our field lights. It's all the accounts for our field lights.
But it would also be how we maintain the grass, lawnmowers, gas, electric. It would be everything associated with maintenance of our open space.
No, the gas that we use for the maintenance of it isn't included. It's I want to say almost solely our lighting, our electrical for the open space field. So any field lighting and stuff like that.
It's the direct utility.
Yeah. We don't track out what gas is used for what field or anything like that.
Yeah, so, but what we do is like the municipal vehicle fleet, we do put that gasoline data in, but not all like some vehicles are exempt. So like heavy duty vehicles get tracked, but are exempt from some of the like energy efficiency policies under Green Communities. And it's a pretty in-depth tool. So if there's like very specific data questions, we'd have to, go in, and Cecilia and I can look at the data and pull it for you. But
Well, I think to expand on your question, the gas that's used for mowing the lawn and snow blowing would be part of what the town supplies gas for. So, but that wouldn't necessarily be called out separately. It would just be part of the overall vehicle gasoline use. Is that correct?
I think so. Within
Yeah.
MBI, there's just a category for gas and diesel. I work with Cecilia on the Green Community, so I know MBI well.
Okay.
And it has, but it's basically building energy use, gas and diesel, and the fields.
Yeah,
But we don't keep track of the little snow tractors and leaf blowers
And like, for instance, not in MEI, I track like what division uses what amount of gas, but like for Parks and Forestry, I could tell you how much gas they've used and diesel they've used over the last year, but I couldn't tell you what was going to them driving themselves around versus an actual lawnmower.
I see.
So you can track their reduction in macro as they change what kinds of vehicles are doing those services, for example. Okay.
Can you clarify, in the first part of your talk, you talked about doing a greenhouse gas inventory for municipal operations only, but then in the second part, you talked about doing a greenhouse gas inventory that was more complete for the whole town, correct?
So what we're currently scoped and funded to do under the Green Communities grant is to just do the GHG inventory for municipal operations. And so that's what we're in the process of. It's mostly built off of the data that is in Mass Energy Insight, which we were just talking about. We did want to share, though, that we have this tool that MAPC has developed and uses with communities to do a more comprehensive community-wide GHG inventory. It is set up to be something that you can use and do on your own or work with us or a consultant to do. Unfortunately, we went back to see if there was more funding from Green Communities to include a community-wide GHG analysis, and there wasn't additional funding left at this point in that bucket to like fund our time to do it, to do the community-wide GHG analysis.
And what do most other towns do? Do they use that template and then hire a consultant, or do they have enough resources in their own town to do it themselves? Can you give us some examples?
Yeah, I don't know. Francelli's has been doing a lot of support with communities on it. I do think it's like a wide range. Some have been able to do it themselves or work with us or another consultant. But Francelli's, do you want to just talk about some of the ones that you've worked on recently?
Yeah, for sure. So one example is for the city of Gloucester, we're doing a climate action plan with them. And so that was scoped into their climate action plan scope. And so we were able to do the greenhouse gas emissions inventory, use that tool to create one at the beginning of their process. But I think one example is, as I was saying, like the town of Arlington, they're one of the first ones, if not the first one, to use the tool, and they did it on their own. So they had the staff capacity to be able to do it.
We actually did an initial one on a volunteer basis last summer using the MAPC tool. I think there's maybe some loose areas in it, but we've got to start on.
Well, that's good.
And I think it's in our shared folder.
It is.
I just think, I guess my only question about that would be that if you're going to use a baseline greenhouse gas assessment and then do some sort of intervention, and then 5 years later, you're going to need to do another one. The baseline one is going to be really important that you capture all the data that you need. So I worry about a volunteer approach to doing that at this point, if we're serious about doing this, but I don't know enough about it. I know Arlington, which is the town that I was supposed to evaluate, has a very significant amount of staff that's dedicated to this task. You know, I think they put a lot of effort into this, and that's why they were able to do it. But they're not volunteers. I mean, they're paid staff. So, and now they're going to do it again. So they're planning for their next greenhouse gas inventory, you know, which will be coming up again. But it's going to be done by paid staff, as far as I can tell. Is that correct, Francellis?
Yeah, I believe it was done by someone who's paid staff.
Yeah, they have both an energy manager as well as someone who focuses on like climate resilience on their staff. And I don't know, there's two folks that have their hands raised on the Zoom, so I don't know if there's a queue.
I think Joe is first.
Okay.
Sure, great briefing, great presentation. Thank you so much. Yeah, I agree. We need to get a plan for a credible greenhouse gas inventory. It's not an easy thing to create or maintain. I'm just speaking from my background, and even in higher ed, where we have skilled people that know how to do it. It's a very tough thing to do, and that's not even incorporating kind of households into that picture. But my question was more specific to other towns. Is anyone making significant progress, or their rebates or incentives for beneficial electrification of existing municipal buildings? So something we as a committee talked about is, it's one thing to have rules for new buildings, but we need a green grid, and we need beneficially electrified buildings. Has anyone received incentives to really start along that path in terms of feasibility, what it's really going to take to convert a high school to all electric or, a municipal building?
So I think that's a great question because it definitely points to some of the biggest challenges that we see in the work ahead of us is the existing buildings, and has been a biggest challenge under the Green Communities program to date, which has been around since 2008. And so I do think that communities, I think it's sort of like the energy efficiency is getting there, especially in like lighting and electricity. Heating and cooling is a huge challenge. So that electrifying heating and cooling. Going back to Arlington last year, they did release an RFP to do like a master of municipal building and school electrification master plan. I haven't checked in with them recently to know where that stands. There aren't currently, the incentives are still and funding are still fairly piecemeal. So there's no sort of funding mechanism that is dealing with like your energy efficiency and your energy production and all sort of like encompassing it all. A lot of communities have been very successful working with ESCOs and performance contracts in terms of energy efficiency, but again, they don't deal with that electrification piece.
Okay, very helpful. Yeah, that might be something we circle back with Arlington to see how they're doing with their master plan, because we're very interested in that.
Yeah, and I think, as you said, there's a lot of communities that are working on, if they're doing new buildings, planning for net zero or passive house or electrification of new buildings. But these existing buildings, especially historic buildings from, the early 1900s can be very challenging. And actually a lot of school buildings from the 60s and 70s may be even more challenging because their building envelopes are not as good. I think Steve?
Yeah. I do have a question. So maybe a little bit more broader than just the greenhouse gas inventory. What is your experience with other towns with regards to either working with MAPC or outside consultants on the entire process of building a plan? If you could kind of bucket accounts into those that are using an outside consultant, maybe those that have strong already sustainability coordinators or committees, and then those that are starting out from scratch and not having either of those. Do you have a sense of where towns fall and maybe a little bit about their success rates?
Let's see. Again, it's sort of hard because they run the whole gamut. I think you guys might have reviewed like the town of Wellesley's plan, which is a neighboring community. So they worked with an outside consultant, Kim Lundgren Associates.
Right.
And I think there's like pros and cons of like working with the regional planning agency or putting out an RFP and getting a bid with a private consultant. One of the benefits of working with us is that we can do streamlined contracting. So if you sort of like if you like have a tight timeline and want to skip the competitive bid process, there's also sometimes we respond to bids. So if a community puts out an RFP, we'll respond to it. What I think I told Hank earlier was that we love working with all of our communities, but there are 101 of you. So we don't actually have capacity to do climate plans for everyone. So we're, it's like we don't feel necessarily competitive with the private consultants in this space. I think it just goes back to some of the priorities that you might have and like what are the skill sets that you're looking for. I think Franceli did a great job, like an overview of some of the community engagement and equity aspects. And we have a whole community engagement department at MAPC and can pull on a lot of resources that way. And while we have some folks that have engineering backgrounds on our team, we're not, like if you're really looking for a technical engineer on something, that might be better to go to a different, different firm or subcontract. So I think that just depends on like what your priorities are. And then the other thing we talked about earlier when we were checking in was just like timeline as well. So like these, a climate action plan is likely going to take at least a year, if not 2 years, especially to do the community engagement pieces. So I think just factoring that in. One thing I will say is that we're happy to also kind of like work piecemeal. So if you need help, like just scoping out to get to the point where you're releasing an RFP, that's something that we can support on. And like a GHG inventory, if you wanted either review or to work with us on just like pieces of it, like I think the GHG community-wide inventory usually only costs like I think between $3,000 and $5,000. So you could do like a direct service contract with us and do that. The other thing, sorry, I'm talking a lot. The other thing that we have done is work with communities on actually drafting grants as well. So if there's, we include a couple different funding resources, but if you know that you want to work with us, we can help work with you to actually go after some of the, whether it's like a EEA planning assistance grant or an MVP action grant. Those all have
question about that.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I'm really curious. So for a group like ours, where we're sort of at the beginning stages of putting this plan together, are there grants, what would you recommend? Where would we start in terms of looking at these opportunities for grants and funding? Are there a few that you think we'd have more success with given where we are?
Yeah, so unfortunately, some of the grant rounds happen mostly in the, like some of them happen in the, they might only come up again sort of next March, April. We do have a bucket of funding at MAPC, our technical assistance program, the TAP funding, which comes from different state dollars, and it allows us to work with communities either on like innovative projects or provide it's a smaller bucket of funding. It wouldn't get you through the whole climate action plan, but could help kind of like launch the project or do some scoping. And then it is possible with like future funding through green communities could potentially help it as well. And then there's another one that we included, which is the Massachusetts Efficiency and Regionalization Grant. I don't know what the timeline is on that one off the top of my head. But yeah, I think we'd be happy to like help identify grant programs or and help think about what might be good opportunities to go after. And I think it also depends a little bit on like how aggressive of a timeline you all want to have.
Right. So I think it's important to figure out what we're trying to accomplish first. I think the staff are actually pretty good at knowing what some of the grant opportunities are.
Yeah.
But opportunities come when you say, we want to do XYZ, then you say there's a grant category that does this. So the figuring out what we're doing is actually the really critical first step. I have a question, if I could go back for a minute. When I read the state law, it talks about a baseline of 1990. You haven't talked about 1990 at all. We actually have no idea what our baseline is in 1990. Who does, or how does this work? What does this even mean? How should we think about that?
Yeah, so I think this came up recently. One of our colleagues, I think, was presenting at another community where we're all sort of headed in the same direction towards net zero by 2050. I think the state still sort of has some of their interim goals of like an 80% reduction by this based on 1990 levels. So like the state has that, and they're doing a lot of those regular inventories and reporting. Municipalities don't need to do that level of inventory for 1990. I think that I think it was Joe's point, or maybe it was Paul's point earlier, like you can set your baseline for whatever makes sense for you, and then use that to kind of be your forecast planning forward, and then create some interim goals. So if we're thinking about the next 30 or so years to 2050, what are your goals at 2030? What are your goals at 2040? And there's going to be sort of what is realistic for a community like Needham to tackle and to kind of provide a roadmap to do the work. That's going to be different than what the state has to think about, and also different what like the city of Boston or other larger cities might also be investing money and resources in to kind of calculate down to the level of detail that they're doing. So I think a lot of the communities right now, in terms of their plan, are really thinking about, okay, we have some of these long-term goals, but what are the things that we can be doing in the next, 3 to 5 years to 10 years to like tackle this and get us on the right path, and put us on the pathway to net zero, to the point that like there's going to be like technology changes and huge challenges for us to figure out as we need to get there. Does that answer your question? I know it's not like a perfect answer.
Well, sort of, not exactly. So, so the answer is I can just forget the state law to a great extent, and we can sit here and look at our sources of energy usage, of greenhouse gas use, and determine which of those we are most able to tackle in the near years and what amount of relative reduction that does. But for example, I sit here as a town and say, okay, if we're a town and we've already done 8 schools and converted them from oil to natural gas, and the town of Wellesley has converted 2 of their schools, they're going to have a much bigger impact as they make that conversion over the next umpty years, right? So I mean, everybody's starting from very different places. If we're thinking we're starting now, which is fundamentally what you're saying to me, we're really just starting now.
Yeah.
Get all the rest. Okay.
Yeah, and there's other communities like City of Chelsea that have, natural gas processing plants in their communities. So I think that's why when you look at it from a municipal level, it's going to be different looking at it from within your community to like regionally to state, because whatever you can't kind of reduce out, then you would be netting out. So like buying renewable energy credits or doing carbon offsets and things like that. So when you look at like the state plan or City of Boston plan, they really calculate what that wedge is for reduction. And then there is still stuff that has to be offset. And, in the next 30 years, we don't really know in terms of technology changes and things like that. But yeah, I would say like focusing on like what we can do now and in the near term, near being like the next 10 years to kind of aggressively get us on that pathway. And there's things that municipalities can be doing that you have control over, and then other things like what National Grid and Eversource do that as a municipality you have very little control over, and that's more of a a state piece.
We have party.
So this question has probably much more of a statewide aspect to it, and that is, in order for us to get to our goal of carbon neutrality, and there's a phrasing, there's this thought that we might have to have our electric usage or production twice of what it is now to be able to offset our natural gas and oil usage. We're talking about heat pumps, electric cars, and things such as that. But what I'm actually getting at is that in order to accomplish this, where our whole electric grid is going to have to change with this capacity, which means all the transformers around our towns and the state have to change. But what's going on is the utilities, like Eversource, they are finding whatever way they can to make the homeowners pay for those upgrades. Has this question come up at all as far as what we're going to have to do and how we're going to have to do, how we're going to accomplish that so homeowners are not, individual homeowners are not filling the bill. We're all filling it, but individual homeowners are not going to be hit by $5,000, $6,000 or $6,000 charges. What has come up about that?
Yeah, I think that's a great point and good question. There's huge equity questions when you think about what are those increased costs that might be passed on to consumers or homeowners. And that is really where I think our role as a regional planning agency and also hearing from municipalities and residents and advocates is that sort of advocacy for greater protections for consumers, and thinking through that piece of like, how do we not pass those costs on to consumers? So there are folks that are working on it, and there is like a an environmental justice working group that is engaged with like the state climate action planning process, and a lot of those advocates are talking about that now, because it's not just a like future issue, it's happening now as people want to, maybe install solar plus storage and getting hit with additional interconnection costs, or thinking just about rising utility bills, particularly over the last year. So it is something that we're working on. And I think from a municipal perspective, thinking about like, okay, how are the policies that you might be thinking about locally? How are those going to impact residents within your communities? Or like, is there like financial support that can go to supporting those who most need it? So
I just want to focus on the equity aspect. This is directly related to that. You talked about the equity, and you had specifically talked about solar and storage and so forth. Because I mean, that combination is the only way we're going to get to where we need to go. But there's definitely a massive equity issue going on, because, and finding a way so we have, no matter who you are as a homeowner, no matter what your income is, you're not hit with these charges. Again, the whole public is paying for it if it's not the individual homeowner, but at least there's some equity. So there is that conversation going on to try to bring that equity into place.
Yeah, at this, like a lot of the state tables, with there's the environmental justice working group that works on the policy side, and my friend Liza, my boss, Cami Peterson, who's our departmental director, also sits on the Energy Efficiency Council for the state, and they talk a lot about these sort of utility costs and equity issues within that as well. So I don't necessarily have a hard stop, but I will have to get off at some point to go say goodnight to my 2-year-old. So I just want to be mindful of the time and see if there's other last questions that we didn't get to, or yeah.
Sasha, I have a very direct question. If this committee were to recommend that we expand the greenhouse gas inventory to include non-municipal, or possibly even further into like a full climate action plan consultancy, you mentioned that there's limited capacity at MAPC. Are you saying that you do not have capacity now, or you're saying that we'd have to probably move fast to get access to that capacity?
So we could probably easily extend to like do a community-wide GHG inventory for like in the near term, like summer into early fall. For climate action plan, for like a full scope of work, that would be like a year. I think we'd have to, it just depends. Again, I think we'd have to talk about like how quickly you'd want to move. We have a large team, but like many organizations, we're facing a lot of turnover and just things as well. So yeah, I don't want to say no, but it might be something that like if we were what is it now? It's like May now, would maybe want to put something in the hopper for like the fall or something. It wouldn't be something we could like be like, oh, and also contract. So like, let's say we contracted within a month, like we wouldn't necessarily be able to start in a month, like, but planning ahead to the fall is definitely something doable.
Great, thank you.
You have a question?
Well, I know you do have to go, and we slotted 50 minutes.
Yeah,
I think
I don't want to take up all of your time tonight either.
extremely helpful. I did distribute your slides to the full committee, and so all of those are active links. I've also downloaded onto our files some of the things that she had mentioned for reference. And I think we as a group need to figure out what our next steps are, what our timeline is, and certainly looking at the municipal use needs to be a first step. So we're embarked on that right now, and we'll continue on that. And then as we expand it, we'll figure out which next steps we do take. And certainly within this committee, we have a lot of expertise. The question is, do those experts have the time to devote to it? Because it does take an awful lot of work.
Well, and I think it's important to recognize that from a select board perspective, back to Stephen's question and Sasha's point, I think we were anticipating that the group would be poised to come back with a request in the fall that might go to fall town meeting for some specific support. So our job in the near term is to figure out what that ask will be.
Okay.
I would also say just we need to sort of keep in mind the sweet spot of our scope, which is your points are very valid, Artie, as far as the greater issues of grid equity. What do we do with the gas network? But that's kind of, I think it came up in the first meeting. That's not really, it's
There's nothing
something,
we
you know,
can
as
immediately
Buckminster
do.
Fuller
Yeah, we
used
can't
to
do.
verbosely say, it's macrocosmically irrelevant.
And I think we have really good examples, right, from these plans,
Yeah.
from these towns. I mean, right, like we all looked at them. I looked at Concord. They have 22 things that they think are things they really can influence over the short term, over the next 5 years. So I think that's our job is, you know, what are those? What does that list look like? And where do we start?
And we've got some really good resources. Another thing I threw on the shared drive, there's Acton did an RFP because they're
Right.
very actively looking at how do we electrify, and they had so they're actively looking at some of their buildings. So it's worth looking at specifically to Joe's point of view, but in terms of what's required.
Natasha has a question, and then after Natasha's, maybe we should.
Let Sasha go.
Yes.
Can we let her go
Let
first?
Sasha go.
I have a quick question. Did you, and I'm sorry that I missed the last meeting, I was out of town, but did you talk about vision and goals? Because I think in order for us to move forward, I think we have to kind of have a vision and goal for the town. Even I was looking at the agenda for today, the recommendations of select board. We can throw some things in there, but I think we need kind of a bigger overarching goal for us to be able to respond to and then continue to add to.
Great point.
Agreed.
Yeah, and purpose in terms of, it sounds like we're kind of jumping to implementation, which is great, because I think that's where we all want to get going. But, you know, I understood our goal really is to create the plan, not really create all the solutions and answers quite yet. So we have to
Yeah,
work
and I
through it.
think looking at some of those examples is a great place to start, or, you know, RFPs or commitments that other communities have been done. And also, you know, like even outside of having a, you know, being scoped, like we can certainly help review you know, like if you have a document, you want an MAPC's eyes on it, can certainly spend a couple hours helping to give feedback on stuff as well, if that's helpful.
Great.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for having me. We will continue to work with Hank and Cecilia and hope to see you all soon. And also, I think I included our email addresses in the PowerPoint slide. So if you have any questions, feel free to reach out.
Great. Thank you, Sasha. Thank you,
Thank you.
Francelis.
Thanks, everyone.
Wow.
It's going to be a wealth of great information.
So I think, Marianne, to your earlier question, I think the way the state approached things was to try to push the utilities that they had very specific control over to push them toward the SREC program, toward putting in large-scale solar throughout the state as much as possible, creating the ability to approve wind power off of, to look initially at the transition from oil to natural gas and conversion to much more efficient natural gas, combined with the mass save assessment and Nancy Kerrigan's whole thing about having the envelope of your house and the insulation within your house improve. Because in any electrification program, you have to first start off by improving the efficiency of your envelope. And as we look at the town buildings, the older schools have that very same problem. And I don't know if we would ever get back into one of the programs with the MSBA for the green roof replacement, like what we did at Pollard. But that was during the last downturn that occurred. At the same year, we also upgraded the boilers and the hot water heaters to Lochinvar natural gas high efficiency.
What was the green roof? I don't remember a green roof.
I don't know, is that
It's
still a
not- it's
program
not-
though? It was a program.
Well, they still have envelope programs,
Okay.
which include full window replacements, which include roof replacements. Now, we didn't put a green roof on it. We improved the roof. It's white, it's reflective. It's not a growy roof. But it more than doubled the amount of insulation that was on the roof. It wrapped the outriggers. So there were a number of efficiency improvements. That were
Maybe this is something we already have, and I'm just so new to all this. Is there sort of a list of activities or initiatives or programs that we've undertaken over the last few years? And if not, maybe we can start to gather that just so we really can either build on things or understand where we've been.
So we do have that.
We
It
do.
was in our Green Communities application. We had
Okay.
to pull that together.
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
that
it's a
exists already.
decent start to,
Good. That
in
would be
terms of
great.
what we've done and
Mhm.
mapping out things. Oh, it's very short term. I think it's a 5-year. And
Right.
Yes.
Yes.
Do you mind putting that in the?
is it
I
in
think
Is it
it's
in
in-
there?
I thought it was in there.
Okay, that'd be
I
great.
think there's a fair amount in there, yeah.
Yeah, I see the other towns of, it's helpful in community engagement too, right? I think that's an important thing to be talking to people about, all the things we have done and the success we've had and how we're going to build on that.
And I think the highlights include conversion of all the streetlights to LEDs. Is that completed?
Yeah.
I think it is.
Yeah.
The rollout of LEDs in all of the school buildings. That's
Traffic
in
lights, too.
process.
traffic lights were done too, right?
Traffic lights were all converted. Yeah.
Of course, the Sunita Williams School, which was the silver, although it didn't take Hillside offline on a temporary basis, not yet. The new roof at Pollard was part of that program. The boiler upgrades at Pollard.
It's a pretty.
Yeah.
A lot of stuff going backwards and then looking forward at some of the capital plan things. And there are a couple of Hail Mary passes in there, like Emery Grover. I think we just
Emery Grover.
you know, that on the long-term plan.
Sure.
But
And how about residential or? It
I think
sounds
that,
like,
well, no, because one of the challenges actually
Mhm.
going back to the greenhouse gas inventory is
right, you didn't know.
municipal emissions are 8% of. So we've got this three-part vehicles, commercial buildings, residential buildings, and that's the bulk of our emissions.
Yeah.
And that's the challenge that I think the climate action plan has to address.
But I think in most municipalities, by taking the lead on it,
Oh, definitely.
then you're saying, well, we're doing it and we want to encourage you to do it, but there is financial investment. Now, the other thing that I've tried to link the MAPC resources for public housing. They have a specialist who just focuses on public housing. Tried to connect them with Reg to as they look at their program in reconstruction and other things, totally either rebuilding or upgrading the insulation and the thermal envelope in all of those buildings would be critical. And they have quite a large inventory. And in terms of future CPA funding, that clearly is part of their goal to tap into those opportunities.
And have we done anything policy-wise? So in terms of building regulations or?
Well, going to the green communities, the town accepted the stretch code at that time. And the state is now looking at a net zero code, which will become the next stretch code with implementation, I think, in 7 years to be required.
So we'll be building Pollard, Mitchell, and High Rock. I mean, that's on the horizon. So that would be included in those stretch codes.
In
Not
theory.
net
In
zero.
theory. Yeah.
I mean, not if it's for 7 years.
There'll be some. No, there'll be some.
Well, we can opt in before 7 years. It's 7 years required. So I think the earliest we could opt in would be 2024, like if they don't, get it out before the end of 2023.
Yeah, because it's currently not finished. So we're talking about
Right.
something theoretical.
Oh, yeah, we're still like blue
circumstances,
sky.
but yeah.
Yeah.
And
To get
this-
back to Nakasha's question about, a vision, and then maybe connecting that to Nick's point that the vast majority of our greenhouse gases in Needham come from private, either citizens or businesses. Maybe just as one thing that I picked up on in the Wellesley Climate Action Plan was inclusiveness. There was a very deliberate effort to bring more people into the process of developing the plan. I think they understood pretty early that a lot of the implementation is going to happen outside of the municipal's, the city's direct responsibility. And so there were student groups and nonprofits and schools and businesses and building owners and houses of worship that were brought into working groups throughout the process. So I'm not sure they were inventing actions out of whole cloth. I probably, anticipate they would use the same sorts of sources like MAPC and other playbooks that already exist. But the process that they went through seemed to be designed to try to mobilize all sectors of Wellesley early on before the plan was actually adopted. And that might be something for us to discuss as a vision.
Can I share my screen a second? Hank,
Sure.
do you mind? Or Stephen? Let me, I just have here. This is the one for Wellesley. And this kind of says how they engage their community. So I
Yeah.
thought this was a really, really good graphic. They had 70 working group stakeholders, they have 30 attendees at the first Building Energy, 16 community presentations. So it really said how they engage on the community. And then it also had a plan overview. These were the pathways There were 6 of them: governance, energy, buildings, mobility, natural resources, and waste, and then the guiding principles. So it doesn't have to be super elaborate, but it has to have clarity. And then within them, there are different implementations. The other one, and I will talk really quickly, the Somerville is the one that I looked at because I know that they're way ahead of the curve on a lot of things. And they had long range goals, but again, they also had 5 or 6 items that they were interested in pursuing as goals. And then they actually had a really good graphic about, then they created 13 priorities, which are these, which, you know, the different, and then within those, there were action items. So I think it's like, I think in order for us to do all this work, we could do it piecemeal, but I think we kind of have to look at it holistically. And I think that there's some really good examples that are already done that we can take from without having to reinvent the wheel.
And just what does it take to, you know, what does it take to, I think we have to have a good understanding from, and we have some line of sight now through these other plans of what does it take to do this, right? What types of, and I think that's maybe to your point, Marianne, it's like, what do we need in the short term and in the fall? What are we going to ask for? Is, you know, it seems most of these towns have, you know, dedicated paid resources and or they've engaged with a consulting organization to help them. It all depends, because if we want to do it in a year, that's what it takes, I think, that kind of level of commitment. If it's something we're comfortable doing it in 2 to 3 years, then potentially we can do it on our own. But if I'm not sure what everyone thinks.
I like the faster route.
I mean, that requires, I think, resource, and as much as we want to be helpful, I don't think any town has been successful with 7 and 8 people just trying to get it done. Yeah, right, meeting once a month.
So to your point, and maybe perhaps moving to our 8 o'clock agenda, in terms of the select board, would it, on top of the things that we put on the agenda, maybe securing funding for a consultant that really help us focus and gather those community groups, gather those voices. And not only because we don't necessarily have time, but to have somebody outside of Needham to say, well, gee, you have all these people who aren't in the room. And I would say that's.
And we can even see, I mean, Concord shared their RFP. We can see exactly what they asked for in terms of, you know, looking for a consulting organization to help with them.
So I don't know if that fits in what you do for the select board in terms of goal setting, you know, not saying, you know, give us money,
But yeah, we're saying give us money.
we're saying we need some coordinating help.
Yeah, and I would say that I was a little unimpressed with the MAPC's commitment when Stephen asked point blank whether they could commit to a holistic program or whether they had the resources. And she
They
couldn't
certainly
really.
can respond, right, if they want, right? They could be one of the groups
Sure.
who respond.
No, but they didn't really, she didn't really say for sure whether they had the resources or the continuity of resources to do that. And that was the information I got from the director at Arlington, which is that, you know, they felt that the best thing to do was to create an action plan and a greenhouse gas inventory with one group who does the whole thing all together. It seemed like that was the most streamlined approach, which means from the beginning to the end, you want to have continuity and someone who you're going to be able to depend on who's going to have the resources to do it. She couldn't really answer that question. In all fairness, she couldn't answer the question. I mean, she was being honest with us, but if we wanted to do this within a year or so, or 2, do you need, or would you feel more comfortable to have someone who could make that commitment up front?
I think success is what matters. Then we have to define what success means. Then if we set the definition, then can we accomplish that within a year? I mean, I think we've seen the other towns. We need to get a little more digging into the other towns. What they have is, but the goal is, you know, 2030, 2050 in 5 years. Can we have something, a really good plan in a year? I think we could. But it's definitely going to take some outside resources in order for but the town has to buy in. And for the town to buy in, or like Natasha or Stephen was sharing about Wellesley, all these stakeholders that they're bringing into play. You know, that's what's gonna-
just to reiterate with Wellesley, they did have an outside consultant. They were doing almost bi-weekly or weekly meetings for about 8 months. And that's how they got it within a year. So I do want to be realistic. I mean, if we wanted to do it in a year, we'd probably have to ratchet up our cadence dramatically as a group, with or without a consultant. So that's just want to make sure that we're clear on that. But I think Natasha's had her hand up for a while.
No, just for a little bit. So I agree. It takes a big commitment, and it's going to take a while. However, so how do we deal with things that are pressing, at the moment? Like if there are initiatives that we have, deadlines, and like Ed Quinlan had told me about a community solar for low income housing. So I'm putting on my planning board, housing plan committee group here hat that says, you can get 20% off of electricity for low income housing. So if there are opportunities like that, can we make, even though we're trying to do this bigger plan and take our time to do it right, are there some initiatives that we want to make sure that we can work on the same way that Hank's been working on the schools and doing all this stuff? How do we create two paths? One that is for the larger vision and goals, and one that deals with, a lot of, even like immediate zoning issues that are just basic that maybe our green communities already has. So I guess it's like, are there two paths, or is it one path and then we miss out on some things? I'm not sure. I just wanted to bring that up because I think there's two things we want to talk about, is the larger plan and then action items that are kind of low hanging fruit.
I'm thinking of electrical aggregation too. We talked about, do we put that on ice while we try to make, I prefer to do the two paths if we could.
I think we have to almost, as a goal, to facilitate the actions of entities across the town, municipal and otherwise, to reach a cleaner energy future, which is a sort of so that means if there's an opportunity for municipal aggregation, there's an opportunity for community solar in housing. We know it's a good thing. We don't have a number, we don't have an item number on the plan, but there's no reason, is there, to not do it. We're not saying go out and buy 20 electric pickup trucks. That's not a bad thing either.
I want to say Joe has his hand up, but I am going to say, if I have a choice to look at municipal aggregation versus low-income housing solar, I'm going to put my attention first on municipal aggregation, because I can get a much bigger payback if I can figure out how to get the whole town going on that than I can on the solar. So if there's limited resources, we need to make choices based on the biggest bang for the buck. That's all I'm going to say. Joe.
So I'll echo exactly what Natasha said, and you said a little bit, Catherine, as well. So we looked at these plans. I looked at Acton's plan. They had 38 things. Wellesley had 30 things. Everybody has 30 things. They're all the same 30 things. I think, why would we pay a consultant to go through a year-long process with the town, and only the people that really care about it show up? And those aren't the people that aren't going to get hurt by the most of this plan when the pain settles in, right? So the voices aren't going to be in the room that are really going to be there to make the selection. So I would see the best value in the near term is, I like the idea of hiring a consultant. Let's get the carbon footprint thing done. What's our 1990 baseline? What's our baseline today? Because you can't even go talk to the community if you have no credible data that says, hey, here's our baseline. So I think that's short money to get a baseline initiated. And I think we as a group, let's take all these plans, get everybody's 34 list of items up there and say, hey, we're some smart people in the room. What are the 5 things we know we have to do? And let's put the implementation plan behind the 5 things we know we need to do: the community aggregation, the long-term decarbonization, electrification for municipal buildings. Like let's pick the 5 or 6 that we all, can get close to agreement on. that say we need to get going on, and let's get going on it. And say we reviewed everybody's plan, everybody's focused on the same thing, but they're short, medium, and longer term projects. Here are the short-term things we can bring some knowledge to. We can do that quickly. We don't need to spend every week for 2 years to get to that point.
Yeah, I'd
So-
argue though that, I don't know, to get to that, I would not ignore the community, the power of that community engagement, because
Oh,
ultimately
absolutely. Oh, yeah,
that
absolutely.
is, those are our stakeholders. And for
Right,
this group-
understood, but I think we as a group should go through the thought exercise to say,
we could put a plan in front of folks, but to not engage them early and often is going to be, I think, to our detriment long term.
But they
Yeah,
have-
but you have to lay out how do you go out and engage the community? You say, hey, we have no baseline. We don't know where we stand. All these other towns have all these other plans. They say these 34 things are important. What do you think's important? Let's just change the name on everybody's plan and everybody's town plans, but meet them on it. Like, I know there needs to be an engagement plan, but where do we really need to, what do we need to engage the town on? It's one thing to say, hey, we kind of did an assessment. We think these are the short, medium, and long-term things. Can you weigh in on, is that longer term or should it be shorter term? Should we speed that up? Like, you got to give them a frame of what to react to rather than how do you feel about this? Because they're not
Right.
knowledge experts. I think that's where these things go sideways in some of these towns is you have people with passion that show up, but you don't have anybody with subject matter expertise. I mean, if this is about reducing emissions, there are so many nuances. It's such a technical heavy concept with, how much capacity the grid has, how quickly it can green over time, what the investments are. Like, what are we signing up for as a town? We're signing up for hundreds of millions of dollars of retrofits, and who's going to pay for it? Well, like, these are the things we as a committee need to grapple with before we go out to the town and start to say, how do you feel about it? And because what Acton did is they said, we need to do it by 2030. Yay, they wrote it down. We're going to be climate net zero by 2030. No plan, but it just felt good to say that. So I hear what Natasha's saying. I hear we were in a deficit position with the carbon footprint. I think for a consultant, we could even just start working with the consultant, see how well they do, and then maybe that moves inches into like a community engagement plan.
So one thing I do want to point out, I think, Hank, you had said we have till May 27th to get any goals in front of the select board for consideration this summer. Is that correct?
So the select board asked for input from all the boards and committees for things that we'll consider as we're looking at goal setting for next year. We're not
Okay.
gonna be able to do everything, because trust me,
Right.
everybody then decided, oh, everybody's asking for 10 things.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
it'll be a very interesting process this year.
But Marianne,
Good.
ours
So-
are most
so-
important. I'm just kidding.
Yes. Yeah, sorry. So my question was really just in terms of, building off of what Joe said, we probably need to get down to brass tacks here. And, I'm going to propose maybe this is a motion. Do we need to vote on it? That we at least propose the the community electricity aggregation as a goal for the select board this fall. I mean, that feels to me like a no-brainer. There's no spend in 2022 associated with it, I'm pretty sure. And if we get it done, it'll have a big impact. So can I put that forth as a motion?
Right, I think
I would second that motion.
third, yeah. I mean, I think that the only risk we have is once we get beyond that is we can't just chase every shiny object and every new initiative. So we do need to slow down and create some sort of structure plan with goals and kind of outline the activities versus just continue, I think.
We're building a plane in midair. Simply
Yeah,
put.
yeah.
But that's okay.
That's okay to do a little bit of that, but we should have some time for the building.
I would have also said if there was a recommendation from this group for future buildings, for town buildings at least, and if there's some minimal for significant new commercial developments being built in town, that would be another area that I think would be worth some immediate recommendations.
Should
I
we-
agree with Marianne.
I'd third that.
Are
There's,
we,
Now,
There's
does that
actually
one
a
require
really-
a state approval process? Because that's the problem that Arlington is running into right now, which is that they their committee also recommended a new building all be built in that way, but that it requires a state process that's still not in play yet, or is that not true?
I think you're
I
talking
did-
municipal.
Them recommend no fossil fuels anywhere in town, which is, I think, the Arlington issue. That is counter to what the state's recommending. That's not what I'm saying, but I do think there are some other things we can recommend for large commercial buildings and for town buildings.
So.
Right.
Process basis, should we be on these things as we raise them as motions, or are we gonna come up with, because so far we've got aggregation, we've got a general movement toward requiring green building of some sort in new municipal and commercial construction of a certain size.
I mean, I wanted to throw out there a tree bylaw of some kind.
Right,
But,
there's
you know,
so
working
many.
on that this year.
Right.
So do we
which I
need to
think should
create
be-
our list of
which I think should be
25
a
and then
priority this year.
start
So-
to
So many
narrow
people
down?
want
But I don't think that's an issue for this group. I don't think that
Okay.
rises to priority for this group.
That may be.
It may be coming from somewhere else, right? And
And
but
Well, I don't see that's the case at all. Trees are directly
not?
related to
Yeah.
what's going on. They're very specific.
well,
No,
but
but
in terms of
other
the
groups do.
actual climate action plan, unless, you know, I don't think we would probably have a tree planting.
It's not tree planting.
Part.
It's a dialogue related to tree removal. It's not mitigation.
But as a,
Well, we're not per se coming up with a plan. We're coming up with what are the priorities for the town that help get us the sun type of goal. And that is directly related to, we're talking about, water runoff, we're talking about carbon capture, we're talking about anything that's related to that. And we're talking, here's some low hanging fruit, there's some high hanging fruit. Tree, as far as the population of the town, seems like more of a look. How exactly what it's gonna look like, I don't know, but it's directly related to what we're doing, so I'm not sure how that's.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I agree. Like, are we voting on specific implementation steps or more around the goals? Like, and if the goal is just, we have a dashboard and data and we're transparent about it, that could be, and then there's a set of action steps we're gonna have to take to,
I might-
get that data.
well,
Is the list getting too long? And right now,
I
we're
think
doing
we
Joe's
only have
carbon.
3 things on it.
Well, I
I
mean,
think Joe
the
is.
summer's quick. We're doing town meeting very soon.
Yeah, I mean, the bullets that are listed in the agenda.
Are too many.
they're brainstorming things.
Too many, yeah, they're just brainstorming.
All right.
But we did talk about community electrical aggregation, and town manager wants to come to the next meeting to discuss that with this committee. We've talked about net zero objectives for future, I think, new town buildings. We've also talked about accelerated energy efficiency implementation for town buildings. I guess that would mean renovation of town buildings. And in terms of mass save opportunities for town and residences, I mean, the mass save is an existing program, which has been advocated very strongly by Green Needham and has been very successful in some of those. Other communities have supported that effort through the town website, not just through a third-party nonprofit. And then future town solar opportunities assessment and planning and funding. That is an exercise that we could perhaps assign to our summer intern, who we hope to have at our next meeting. But the first 2 bullets here, well, I guess those are questions. Or do those raise to that level of goal setting that we want to go back to immediately to select board with?
I proposed them, I don't think they do.
No.
So, but at least the bottom 4 bullets might be in that realm, right?
And I don't know if it's a goal question, but to some kind of outside assistance to help the CIPC hone and implement its mission. And I don't know where that fits in.
Yeah, and normally what we would do is try to figure out what the funding needs are and approach MAPC and or power options, both of whom, or as you had indicated, look at other RFPs that towns have put out for that assistance, see what kind of funding level they have looked for. I notice in Acton, Steve, I guess you did the Acton one, they put out an RFQ just for their schools. They had 7 schools and they had $70,000 to look at electrification of those buildings. I think they found somebody to do the work. I haven't seen any final report. And you had indicated Arlington is in the middle of the process as well. So wherever we can rely on that reading of the marketplace, I think is very advantageous. But if we want to do everything at once, we need to set a budget.
So can I suggest, so this was a framework that I've seen used well in the past at MIT, but when we think about the 34 things, if I could share my screen quick, I just found the chart that, at MIT, we love these. Can folks see that? So we use these like 4-box quadrants things. We love we use data to drive everything. But if you think of 34 things and think of 34 dots, like how we would score the 34 dots or 34 areas. So these are the ambitions. Like, what are the things that really have significant impact? Like if, the community, renewables has significant impact and it's pretty low in investment and complexity, it kind of goes like up in this box, right? So those are things that really don't take a lot of money and a lot of complexity. You can implement them pretty quickly and it has a significant impact, right? So those are the ones you run to, right? If it's really simple and it's low cost and it has incremental improvement, like these are things you should just be doing anyway, right? And but things that once you get into big complexities and big investments and long time frames, and it has significant impact. So this might be like electrification of all the houses and the schools and all that. Like that's up in here. That might not be the first thing that you do. And then there's things that really have minimal impact in reducing emissions, but there's still a heavy lift to get done. So those are things that's like longer term stuff. It has minimal impact, but it takes a lot of complexity and investment. And if you score the 34 things, now you have kind of a picture which says, what are the things we can do pretty quickly for low cost that have significant impact? Like those are the ones you run to. So I mean, to kind of take the 34 things and put them in, some sort of prioritization, I think you can at least share your thinking with people. And to say,
who's going to do that scoring though, Joe?
Each one of us individually, like take a shot at it. I don't know. I'm just trying to think of like,
a workshop with piece, you can make that happen.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, the way that Concord did it is they looked at it against two slightly different dimensions, right? You could do it against these sort of generic impact. I don't know, maybe not, but they looked specifically against, how does this influence GHG reduction, and how does this influence our resilience, right? And so those were the 2 dimensions for them. We could decide those are not the right ones for us, but I think it's a little bit subjective to just sort of say, yeah, high impact, but maybe that goes back to, what's important to us. I mean, reduction obviously seems like a reasonable one because that's really why we're here, but.
Yeah, that's our charge is to tee up those things that are going to reduce emissions.
Yeah. Joe's framework actually resonates with me. And actually, I do think if you look at something like the community electrification aggregation, that is a relatively low, it's low effort relatively because we would actually be having a consultant do it for us on I believe commission even. They don't even do it with upfront payment, and it would have a high impact. So it would be in one of those run-to projects. I think that's probably where that would end up. The municipal building electrification I have a question for you on that, Joe, because obviously it's going to take time for those buildings to be built or renovated. But does it make sense to, for example, start the process of coming up with a set of guidelines for municipal buildings, even if that takes a little while?
Yeah,
It's not a high investment. It's a roadmap. It's not a high investment. Not a lot of spend. There's a little time involved with it, but there are, for example, Wellesley has a very nice Town of Wellesley Municipal Sustainable Building Guidelines document that goes through all of their steps for when they evaluate renovations or new building design. That could be another relatively low investment, high impact activity that we could request the select board to look into.
Yep, totally agree. But I think it at least helps our thinking of,
Yeah, I do
teasing
like the
some of these
framework.
things apart. And then that gives us a handful of things that we could start moving the ball forward on, because there's some general consensus, like we're going to end up doing these in the end anyway. And all these other towns are doing the same thing. So I think we're going to end up following others that have already like gotten out in front of us. So I think a lot of us around the table already know what we need to be doing.
Yeah.
But going back to what we want to suggest to for the select board sustainability goals, before we move on to the general things of what we need to be doing, are there other things we want to, I think those bottom four on the list are really what we're looking at.
Joe, can you share your matrix?
Yeah, I'll send that around, Hank. I'll send it to you and then you can distribute it to, or whoever should I send it to. I don't think I have everyone's email.
Just send it to Hank and he'll get it out.
Yeah.
Okay.
I do want to say that one of the four here is not, Mary Ann mentioned the commercial buildings or, any new buildings in town. That's not one of the four. So I would have, everyone consider it. We're having a lot of new development going on in town, and that would be, I think, useful. But I agree with that matrix. And one of the things that we did in the housing plan group is that we broke up into small groups on Zoom or wherever. We broke up and we came up with what are the most important things, and then we came together as a larger group. And we did this actually with the community, and we basically had so much overlap that it was a no-brainer. So I think if we can do this pretty quickly, and you end up finding that again, this we don't need to reinvent. There's been so much talked about in other towns that if we bring up those and rank them and put them in the quadrants, we could do this pretty quickly.
Maybe as a proposal, as a homework before our next meeting, we could all try taking our own plans, climate action plans that we worked on, and taking the actions and putting them into the framework for Joe. I don't know if anybody likes that idea, but I'd be willing to try it.
Do we want to start from a list of try to put them into one list, because there's just so much overlap anyway, and then we're all working from the same set of activities, and maybe it is 30 things, but maybe if we started from a set of 30 and tried to do that versus kind of slightly different versions.
I agree, because we could take all those things and just probably cut and paste, and then each one of us rank, sort of categorize where we think they fall, and then.
Maybe to keep it simple, should we just take one plan and everybody work independently on that plan, and then we can fill in whatever activities from other plans later? I'm just trying to think, how do you zip 10 plans together? Who's going to do that work in the next couple of weeks and then farm that out?
Is this information needed for the next town meeting this month, or when do we want to have this priority available for them to review?
I think it's for select board goal setting, I think is the question. Like how late would be too late for getting into the queue for select board goal setting?
I don't think you're going to have time to get into the queue for select board goal setting with this. So I think there you're back to the things that are on the list that you have already and deciding which ones rise to that level. Right. And I think you have to think about it, that the things that go forward and get discussed there, again, that's part of a community engagement process. Because people do actually look at the select goals from select board goals from a broad area. So, it sends a signal.
Well,
at some
isn't,
point.
isn't the goal to develop a climate action plan?
Yes.
Yes.
I mean,
Well,
that,
that is
I
one
think it
goal.
should
First one.
just be that,
Yeah,
to be
That is the
honest,
goal.
is, right, that's it. That's what we put in front of them. That's the goal.
But that could take 2 years, right? So
That could
if
take
they
2
have a
years,
goal
yeah.
for this year, should we do the 4 that are
For
that have
the-
already been
that as
thought
well
about,
this year.
and in addition to the plan?
I would favor putting some actual projects in front of the select board this year that we believe we can make progress on this year. The climate action plan formation was last year's goal, and it was understood it would be a 2-year process. But there is work that the town is already thinking about doing, and we could probably, influence that in the short term. So I would say we vote on the 4 that's before us.
I agree.
I would propose, though, the net zero objectives for future town buildings be amended to be future town buildings and
Significant
large scale commercial
developments or
development.
something.
Yep, I would agree with that.
Okay.
Can we add residential? Is that like way ahead?
I think that's way ahead.
I think it's tricky. I think there's
Okay.
gonna take more work
We
to
should,
bring
but
on
it's
residential.
Yeah, I know.
tricky.
Thank you.
In year 1.
Yeah.
I'm still confused to why we wouldn't have anything related to the bylaw in there, especially since I've heard that people want it.
You know,
I've heard
It's a
even
current goal.
I've heard even the select board for 10th Street wants to put it
Yes.
as a priority, so.
It's a current goal, consider tree preservation strategies, which is exactly what you're talking about.
why don't we add it? Because at least it's another voice.
Could it just be
group,
at a
right?
higher level about, can the ask be about looking at local policy?
Well, the ask is basically coming up with a tree bylaw, let's say.
That's one
to be
example though,
presented
right?
To town meeting next spring by looking at the communities around us to develop something that makes the most sense.
So that work's not coming from this committee, I don't think.
I agree, I understand it's not coming from this committee, and in selecting an aggregator is necessarily coming from this committee. There are a number of things that are, per se, coming from this committee.
I think aggregation actually is gonna be work that's gonna be overseen by this committee.
Yeah, we'll be with pitching.
But the bylaws, the actual bylaws of energy efficiency and certain things that actually work, some of them weren't actually coming from this committee. It might very well be going to the planning board as far as what some of those zoning laws are gonna do. And I don't understand. It seems to me like a no-brainer as far as it's something that can be accomplished next year. It's something that's directly related to carbon offset. It's something that's directly related to interacting with the community and the community feeling it's tangible to the community. Things that are tangible to the community get them excited about aspects of certain goals that you're trying to get accomplished. So I'm not sure why it's an issue coming out of this.
I have a question. So the one that we were looking at for new town buildings, we're totally talking about new construction. Do we also want to consider for renovation projects that aren't new construction? I'm just thinking from my role, like we have an RTU replacement project coming up, having some guidance on that. Are we gonna just look at new, or?
No, that's the next bullet, which is accelerate energy efficiency implementation in town buildings.
Okay, I just heard the other one.
I would also say I'm comfortable with the vagueness of future town buildings, because there's a difference between an RTU replacement versus renovating a wing versus a building versus a new building, and as a goal.
These are 20-year decisions. So, and I don't know if you saw Ed Quinlan's reports on the RTU replacement. It's complicated.
Yeah.
And it's not easy. But if the town building maintenance department and the PVPC don't have clear direction, the direction that we currently have is, well, let's get the best bang for your buck. And it doesn't necessarily involve greenhouse gas. But if the goal is to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, then you take a different approach.
So should that be a goal that, if we want a driving goal, that the select board should pursue building policies that optimize greenhouse gas reductions
Yeah,
and cost effectiveness?
I would suggest anybody who hasn't seen it, take a look at the Wellesley Municipal Sustainable Building Guidelines, because it does encompass all of these things: new buildings, renovations, energy retrofits. They have a process, they have governance. It doesn't mandate anything, but it does give the guidelines on which way to, or how to consider these decisions, because they are 20-year, 30-year, 40-year decisions. And it seems like a very useful tool that Wellesley is using now in their climate action plan as well. So it might be a very good place for us to spend some time.
I think you uploaded that.
I think I did. If I didn't, I will.
And I was a member of the PPBC for almost 10 years, and I can tell you from what Hank is saying, that it's really helpful to understand the mission, the larger mission of the town, to be able to have a checklist to implement it, even to create RFPs for projects. So any guidance that can be given would be really helpful in moving projects forward in a sustainable way.
And in fact, when you helped organize the net zero discussion, the committee said, that's wonderful, we like it. What's our mandate? We implement, we're not the user group, we're not the select board. We need direction.
That's a great goal.
So I think if this group isn't ready to make that recommendation right now, it's not something that you're going to be recommending as a goal right now, because I don't think you know what you want to recommend. So I do think you should recommend what you know you want to recommend, right? There's only so far you can go until you know better. You don't have to solve all of it in year one, right? But there are some concrete things that can be done to make progress.
So if the submission to the select board for the sustainability goals focuses on these 4 bullets under the broader headline of completing the climate action plan, that might be an appropriate approach.
High skill and systems, some type of truth. It makes no sense not to have it. It is so related to this open space, water mitigation, carbon capture. It's so directly related to this. Every year that goes by as a year you never get. Makes no sense. Makes no sense. People around town want it.
I would add it.
It just, because I think a lot of other voices are saying it's going to just go on the list.
Mhm.
And so it's another voice saying that. So
As a shared goal across, right?
Yeah,
We support it from the Climate Action Committee.
Look at it. Look at every plan in every town. It's stated in it. It's not the tree bylaw is not stated in there, but the fact that something has to be done is stated in there. Lots of trees. Everyone knows.
It's fine too.
And I'm just going to say to everybody, well, it seems very easy, right? You are embedding in private property law and the way that people feel about their houses, that it is a much more complicated one to implement than I think we're even going to find municipal aggregation is. And I think that's not uncomplicated. So I just offer that as food for thought,
So
based on experience already.
Well, these are goals, right? I mean, they're
Yeah.
they're proposed actions that
Yep.
I think that's in the spirit of
It
that.
may not be next spring.
Right.
So
So just looking at a time check, I think we only have about 7 minutes left before the meeting adjourns. I think we probably need to vote on something. We have a couple proposals, right, on the table.
shall we take them item by item? Since we've been talking about, so I guess I could make a first motion that we add community electricity aggregation as a goal. Aye.
Aye.
I
Sounds unanimous to me.
And the second item would be, I'm gonna modify this slightly, net zero objectives for future town buildings and large-scale commercial development.
I'd
Is that-
also consider existing building.
Yeah, I would amend to say existing and future buildings. It's
Should
still
we say
vaguely,
net zero or consideration of minimize greenhouse gas emissions from your town, from,
I might be even more general, develop sustainability guidelines for existing and future municipal buildings and large commercial buildings.
Yeah, I second.
okay, so the motion is to develop
Mhm.
sustainability.
Sustainability for existing and future municipal buildings and large commercial
Right.
buildings.
Yes, second. Yeah.
Aye.
All in favor?
Aye.
Accelerate energy efficiency improvements for town buildings.
I think we encompassed that. in
Yeah,
the
that
last
really,
I agree.
one.
that- yes.
I
Yeah.
agree.
Well, should there
I
be
think-
something around the program that we heard about today that we're gonna be participating and,
Is-
I mean, are we participating in that? The one she presented, it sounded like she's working with you.
The aggregation.
Have we already
No,
agreed to
oh,
that
oh.
as a goal? And
Um,
we
Solar
put
for
that-
low income, I don't know that needs, again, I don't know that rises to the level here, but
we're working with them to develop the focus on the municipal buildings,
Right.
yes, currently.
Mhm.
which fits within that broader, but
But since it's something we're doing this year, maybe we pull it out as
Right,
to
that is-
support that work that's happening, so that if there are
Right.
needs or asks, that this big project.
But that ship is sailing, right?
It is, yeah.
so,
Is that the future town solar opportunities? Is that what you're talking about? Or a different?
no,
one?
we're,
The green communities,
What is she doing?
which is already,
We don't need any
Underway,
more
right.
support, okay.
so then the third item would be to
municipal net.
support future town solar opportunities.
It feels really vague. I don't-
Could we add future equitable town solar opportunities so that it opens it up to if there are any other programs that are happening? To
Is
create
that
equity?
something we're gonna be doing this year? This one feels like
I also wonder if does this not get encompassed in the sustainability guidelines for current and existing buildings? I mean,
Well,
wouldn't solar siting be part of that, or are we just talking about
Wanted to put,
not building?
if we wanted to put solar in one of the town-owned parking lots.
Yeah, so it involves different committees. In order to do that, there would have to be a change in the zoning bylaw to allow for that. There would need to be the funding associated with it, although it could, suppose it could be a PPA, power purchase agreement, similar to what we're talking about with, but I think the language you describe here is broad enough to allow either of those to happen. And it would encourage zoning bylaw changes associated with that issue. Already, anybody's allowed to put solar panels on their rooftop, but they're not allowed to put a solar canopy on their site, for instance. And likewise, the town,
You know, they can put them on their setbacks.
if they meet the
Setbacks
setbacks and the
property line.
site coverage and all that.
So, so we can say, if we say encourage,
Well, support future
Future.
equitable solar opportunities.
that's good.
I think that's broad enough to encompass a lot of things.
Okay.
Is that what you're thinking, Steve?
I think that was Natasha who was thinking that, yeah.
The other thing, Natasha, I know that there is a program through MAPEC to encourage energy efficiency in low-income housing. And there, and that I think
That's the one that Ed was talking about and sent information on. It's a no-brainer. You just sign up. It's 20% off for low income, and it would support them. I think it's the reason why I would say it is because there's no representation from different groups, you know, that would want that to be a priority. And I feel like we need to look into it and see if that's an opportunity.
Is that related to renewable energy, or simply related to if you're a low income, you will get a break on your electric bill?
So,
I can send information out.
but in terms of goal setting, I like your inclusion of the word equitable,
Yeah.
just
yeah,
to sort of move things
Yeah,
along
that makes sense.
a little bit.
It just encompasses a lot. So if there is an opportunity, we keep it in mind.
Absolutely.
Mhm.
And if it's a simple one,
Definitely should be in there.
so do we have a,
What's the final language? Support future.
Support future equitable town solar opportunities, assessment, planning, and funding.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, but equitable has been the right one.
You have that, Catherine?
Support future equitable town solar opportunities, assessment,
Planning and funding.
planning and funding.
The other plans have all seem to have something around mobility. I don't know if that's something that we think we can deal with this year.
And are we gonna ask or raise the issue of resource for the greenhouse inventory and a master plan? Or are we not gonna do that this time? Because we've talked about needing some larger scope guidance. Are we gonna bring that up as one of the goals or not?
I would say we do.
Sure, ask.
Was it you're asking for fund a study?
Because if we come to you, if we say to you, the board, we're gonna want some money to do something, but we don't know how much, and we're still figuring out what. I think we need.
The goal could be around obtaining some baseline data
Right, there's a priority list.
I mean,
Yeah.
to prioritize that.
I just think that if we're gonna need our baseline data on our inventory anyways, so should we just tell them that we're gonna need to do this? That's gonna be part of one of our earlier activities, whether we have MACP do it or whether we get an outside consultant or whatever. Should we just tell them that as part of our initial plans or just leave that off the list and go with what our aspirations are?
I guess I would say you're working with them on the town's greenhouse gas inventory. We've got a pretty good inventory using the MAPC's tool.
It may be, did they review what you had put together?
We worked with somebody who then left. And so it needs a review, and some of the things, we got RTS data, but his might have been 2019 data instead of 2017 because the years don't line up. So it's certainly, I would say it's probably a final draft.
It sounded like, at least from the MAPC, that was a relatively low cost item. I don't know whether there's any funding in any other budget that we could proceed with that immediately. Because it seems like a pretty fundamental first step.
I think we need it, yeah.
And
I had actually thought until tonight that was what MAPC was working on. So learning that they were limited to municipal use was new information.
So we're.
Is that, Marianne, is that, I'm sorry, go ahead, Artie, sorry, didn't mean to cut you off.
Do we have something, what line item, what does that line item say? That we're voting on?
I think the goal is to have a greenhouse gas baseline for the community.
Right.
And that may be achieved by reviewing and building on the work that's already been done. So it may take less effort to do it. Because a lot has been pulled together, but I think the goal is we need one for the community.
So really the goal is complete the
Complete it.
greenhouse gas,
Yeah,
support the completion of the greenhouse gas inventory for the entire community.
Yeah.
baseline.
Based on,
Yeah.
And could I just ask, is that good? Is that better as a goal for the select board to be considering, or is that potentially an ask of Kate to see if there's any room in the budget to fund that soon?
But maybe both.
Yeah, it sounds
Yeah.
like both. It sounds like both.
Okay.
Both.
And then
I don't-
is goals, I mean, are we talking about goals like, I still think we've got to have a stakeholder engagement plan. Maybe we haven't completed all the surveys and the work sessions, but to just leave that off of our first year plan, to not even have a plan to plan, if you will. We need a plan to do some stakeholder engagement.
I think that's what I was gonna mention also, that it might not, I don't know if it's a goal or what, but a communications plan on all of this. And engagement is really important.
Part of it, for sure. The communications, how do we communicate and engage, right?
Because we could be doing all this
That's
great
awesome.
work and no one knows about it, and then no one knows how to, capitalize on it or how to engage with it. And I think that's really critical. We just did a survey for the housing plan group and we got some participation, but it was one spectrum of people. And so we need to really think about how do we engage the town as a whole. And it's not easy, but I think it should be a goal, a big goal for us to be able to do that.
And some of these towns have websites with a lot of information, very transparent about, the dashboards and the plans and the activities.
But it
Cindy
requires
Gonzalez
clarity.
did ask,
Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
I'm sorry, Cindy Gonzalez did ask at town meeting if there were updates from this committee that we could, funnel to her. We probably don't have time to talk that through tonight, but it would be a great thing to add to maybe the next agenda and try to get a regular cadence of information out through her channels.
That'd be great.
She's been excellent in creating graphics and creating communication for the housing plan group. So I would highly recommend engaging her.
Great.
which kind of fits into our agenda item from 8:50.
Well, we finished. Are we
No,
finished?
no, but I'm saying we can put that in there. As far as communication as a goal,
I would say it's sort of that broad, stakeholder engagement and communication plan.
So
Is that the committee's goal or you want that? to be the select
that's
board?
it. I mean, I think it's a broader, there was something in the goal setting thing you send around that there needs to be to create or awareness of climate action issues within the community.
well, I mean, if one of these points is, as you stated, develop a communications and stakeholder engagement plan. Is that one of the, that's a broad summary of what you just stated.
Yeah. But that feels like our charge, not something that we're placing on another committee. That feels like square right in what we need to be doing.
Stephen, or Marianne, does Cindy's time, does the select board have to approve Cindy's time to help us, or?
No, the town manager does,
Okay.
but
We may, as part of that, need outside consultant help, and
Absolutely.
we're not going to be able to do all of that on our own necessarily, and that might become an ask. And if they are sort of aware of it earlier on, that this is an important part of what we need your support around.
I think it would not be.
Yeah.
I think the select board assumes that if you're going to build a climate action plan, that it will require community engagement. So it's all part of it.
So should we go back and vote on the
The
support,
baseline.
support the completion of the greenhouse gas inventory base?
Well, did you ever vote on the solar opportunities? Because I don't
No,
have a second.
No,
on
we
that.
didn't vote on, we haven't voted on the last two
Okay.
things, 3 things counting
Just want to
engagement.
make sure.
Mhm.
So,
Although maybe engagement is.
let's have a vote on,
Equitable solar.
Yes.
I'll make a motion.
Second.
Aye.
all in favor?
Aye.
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 This is solar.
And
This is
then
baseline for the community.
support the completion of the greenhouse gas inventory and baseline.
Second.
Is that, yeah,
Aye.
that feels like something we have to do, or is something, what do we need them to support?
Or the debt fund.
Well, I think the support
Funding.
means funding.
Funding, right.
So the ask is the funding.
And maybe if Kate is joining us in the next meeting, we could raise that, maybe add to the agenda in addition to leveraging Cindy's time from a communications perspective.
So did we vote on?
No.
Okay, support the completion of the greenhouse gas inventory and baseline.
Second.
Second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
That's the solar one.
We did.
Then I would like to add, I just the thing related to trees, because I mean, Natasha, I believe you were at the meeting. We were talking about some of our goals or priorities coming in the future, and certainly environmental issues were big in the planning board, were a big goal, and in trees, some type of tree bylaw was, I'm not saying it was unanimous, but maybe it was close to that. And I know there was a working group on for a tree bylaw 4 to 5 years ago. And I talked to Bruce Eisenhower, he was on that, and he said he'd love to be back on that and get that going again. So it makes no sense to me that we're not willing to start that up again. So I would make a motion that, and I don't know.
Like it's already on the list.
Well, if it's on, yeah, but it's on the list, but it sounds like there isn't enthusiasm to continue it. So if we put it on as part of our list, maybe that'll just emphasize the fact that, it's something that I believe the planning board cares about. I believe the community cares about. And I think it's something that we need to do. So I would say that on the list should be the implementation of a tree bylaw. And can it be brought to town meeting next May?
So might we add that just as a suggestion, add it to the inventory, the baseline inventory. So, carbon emissions, right? We emit things, but we have a tree canopy, in the town of Needham. Do we know what it is? And then how much carbon does it sequester every year? It'd be good to know that number, right? Because some towns are counting that against their footprint as an offset. So I think if we can quantify it and we can understand, how it contributes, then we can move towards, policy and ordinances, et cetera. But that would be my friendly amendment to the understanding the greenhouse gas inventory, but it's also the offset inventory of our tree canopy and agricultural land.
It's fine to understand that. I think it makes perfect sense to understand it, but that's not going to change the outcome that we need to do something to stop the amount of trees that are being eliminated. It's not going to stop that.
I feel like we're kind of getting out of focus here. Nobody's maligning the need for trees. We can.
No, I'm making the motion.
Okay, but I was going to say, I would be comfortable. I'm not comfortable supporting something that says implementation of a tree bylaw.
We're studying a tree bylaw.
Consideration of a tree bylaw, ways to preserve trees.
Yeah. I'm fine with that.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm fine with that.
Is it on the planning board list?
No, we haven't put it on a list yet. I don't even know if we per se have a list yet. We've talked about what our priorities are going to be. But I don't think we actually put it on a list yet. I don't know if we have a
To
list yet.
me, to me, it seems like it should be on the planning board list. And we have to, maybe we'll just email Lee and say, is there a list and can we add it, to it? I think these seem more global to me right now, not to say that right now, that's not to say that that's not important and we shouldn't put it underneath one of the overarching. I think if we I think it should be on the planning board list, definitely. And it should be on this list, but if we only have 4 or 3 that they're gonna consider, maybe we should do more overarching and then put it as one, put it underneath one of those. Would you be okay with that?
I prefer it's on the list because I don't understand why there's a pushback, why it's not on the list.
I guess what I would say is everything else we've talked about is clearly within this committee's wheelhouse. If the tree bylaw doesn't go on the planning board's list, there's nothing the select board can do about it.
Well, the confusion I've had is, I've had the planning board say it's a select board's thing. I've had the select board a little bit say it's a planning board thing. So I don't know whose thing it is. And I'm fine if it's a planning board, if it's only in the purview of the planning board, that's fine by me. But I've had people in some planning board say it's not the planning board's decision.
I mean, if it were broader and said that a goal is to look at the sequestration of greenhouse
That's
gases,
clearly within this group.
opportunities for sequestration of greenhouse gases.
That's fine.
That's a very broad principle.
Yeah.
Including agriculture and trees or something like that, then that's more broad.
Yeah, I think that's in the spirit of the other.
Well, it could fall under the greenhouse gas inventory.
Correct.
Well, I like that we're getting data for that, right? That survey would collect data on that. But I like that we had it as an enumerated piece, so it traces out.
That sounds like an ideal opportunity for our conservation biology intern to calculate that for us.
And are we limited? I mean, this is 4 items. Do effect.
I like the term and the wording as far as the carbon sequestration. I like talking about that. I think that makes a lot of sense. And that's combined with the inventory in some aspects of doing something to defer and sequester carbon. I think that makes perfect sense because that's what it's all about. If we're going to produce it, we got to do something to mitigate around it.
Okay. So do we need to vote on something now, or is it part of the greenhouse gas inventory? And then sequestration?
No, there has to be some wording in there, or carbon sequestration.
Wordsmithing over there.
Yeah, I think
What you whatever you wrote was genius.
It sounded good.
So
support the CAPC's goal for implementing carbon sequestration opportunities.
Yeah.
To explore
and also I think it was Paul Bruce. It was John Paul says Joe said something about trying to assess the inventory.
Yeah, that'd be in part of the survey.
Yeah. I think that makes sense.
That'd be great.
That'd be awesome to have.
Yeah.
That'd be awesome.
Well, that would support
That would be awesome.
the bylaws. But it's
Sequestration opportunities. I think we should leave it broad.
Yeah, okay, sounds good.
At one point, I know I had heard that Cambridge had some tool that they use Google Earth to look at tree canopy, but I never found anybody who could actually tell me how to do that. So,
Well, that could be another assignment. Look at how you would do it.
Yeah, and you can look at the tree covers and need them.
Yeah.
You can tell what type of trees are deciduous. You can see exactly what's going on.
think Ed
To a very large extent.
I think Ed knows how to do that.
okay.
Yeah. So it would also be a good way to introduce him to a couple other departments in town. And the great other option, of course, is he can always call his professor and say, how do I do this? Yeah.
So do we have
Andy.
a motion to?
So support the CAPC to explore carbon sequestration opportunities in Needham.
I move that.
Second.
Aye.
I'm in favor.
in favor. Aye.
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 Okay.
So
Can
we
you read
have,
back the one about solar? Can you read that back?
Catherine,
Okay.
hopefully you have better.
You're so mean. I know.
What I've got for solar, support future equitable town solar opportunities, assessment, planning and funding.
I would take that exact one and instead of solar, or in it, keep that, obviously, we agree, and have a mobility piece in there too.
Sorry, what do you mean by mobility?
Electric vehicle, transportation
Transportation.
option. Should we have, should we be looking at more bicycle lanes? Should we be looking at, better transportation options? And all the
Which-
things,
right.
we've done a lot of that, but
Which ties into some of the non-sustainability goals of goals 1, 2, and 3 of commercial development and
there's also transportation.
yes.
Committee.
I mean, they have, I'm looking at what they included in there is accelerating adoption of electric vehicles, improving availability, accessibility, biking, walking paths, electrifying. Low carbon, no carbon transportation options.
So do we want to keep this more broad, or do you want to be getting into so much detail that we overwhelm them in our first meeting? I would argue for 4 or 5 bullets and leave it for that, or how do people feel about that? How many do we have so far?
5.
No, I think we have already probably too many.
I,
Sounds like a good start.
I agree with both sides. I think we need mobility and transportation, but I think we might be.
I'm not sure I would put solar necessarily over that, so I guess just adding it as a.
Yeah, I think the challenge with mobility is it's so in private hands, and there's already a green communities requirement to reduce the carbon footprint of our fleet. So I believe the town's already working on that, has already swapped out some vehicles. They have very little control over private citizens though today. There's got really no control over private citizens.
There may be some programs that, that become available to us and we'd want to make sure we could participate or.
Yeah.
But we could do that. Like we could do that as a group, even that, like, I think we have to separate what we're asking the select board to work on from what we're going to work on. Because there's stuff that is completely out of the town's purview that we're going to have to focus on.
As just to answer your question, as part of the installation of those things right over there, those charge point boxes in the parking lot here, we're obligated within the first 3 years that those go in to sponsor programs for electric vehicles. And the ones in Concord I've gone to, they get dealers to come in, their test drives that people can do. They have electric car owners advocating for it. You can just go in and ask questions. And so we'll be doing that, but I don't think that needs to be one of the goals. But clearly one of the topics has to be mobility that this committee looks at.
Yeah. I'd be careful of flooding
Yes.
the process.
Yeah.
Although it's really worthwhile. Really. And there's also transportation. That's doing it too.
Can we bring the minibus back?
So-
Oh, the minibus back.
Are we completed with the select board goals?
I think we are.
Okay. So how do you want to run the next meeting? Is Joe going to produce base matrix and we come up with a list of the primary categories and then the secondary categories based on Wellesley, and take some numbers and place them on a board? Is that how you want to format the discussion next time?
Hank, what if you just send us all the categories and everybody puts them in order, and then we can discuss it at the meeting and place them in the, or in the
So-
categories, so that we do work
Also-
outside of the meeting?
Absolutely. Joe, if you could produce the base grid
Well, he sent us the grid that he had.
Okay.
Just the
He's already
frame.
And that was just an artwork drawing. There's no,
I mean, I think
So then
everyone
I
can
think-
literally do that if they
Oh,
want.
that's
Yeah.
yeah, and I think, yeah, that's a great student project, is just to have the list of like, 30 or 40 things from all the town's reports that they said are their recommendations or strategies. And then everybody rate it 1 to 10 for impact and rate it 1 to 10 for complexity of implementation. Cost, time, technology, et cetera.
We do it on an easel in here and just.
I think
everyone
people
go
should
post
do it
up.
ahead of time. I
Okay.
do
I think we
people
should do it ahead of time, or we're gonna waste a ton of time in the meeting, that we can talk about, everybody's, where everything overlaps.
I think we
and
can do
somebody
it on
just
our own.
super scores it, just super score everyone's input and put it on a chart, have a student put it on a chart and say, this is where the kind of joint scoring fell out.
If
So-
someone in a survey, I don't know if we have someone who can do that. Just put it in a survey and then we'll get the compilation.
Cindy, who's not helping us yet, but will shortly.
Okay.
But I think we can just rate it, yeah. I don't
But-
know.
I can, I can reach out to Andy Atala. Is he started already?
The 1st of June.
First
He's,
of June.
Be his first
Okay.
project.
he,
Next week.
To have him put it in a survey, we can all respond to it, and then that will just aggregate it on its own.
he's
I'll
finishing.
volunteer to work with Andy on it and put together some sort of maybe a Google form just to make it simple, so we can have it in advance of the next meeting.
We're gonna take Wellesley as a,
Either Wellesley, or we'll see if we can like aggregate a handful of them. I don't know how we do like 10 or more of these, but you start to hit a law of diminishing returns after you've gone through a few of them, right? So
Yeah, I think
if
you
we
hit
took-
3 of them. I know Acton
Yeah.
had 38 good ones. Newton had a whole, cohort of 24, and Wellesley had their list. And they're,
Yeah,
they're all
that's-
pretty much the same.
yeah,
Okay.
exactly. So Andy and I will pick 3, we'll aggregate them, put them in a form, send it out to everybody, and then we can have it done before next meeting.
Perfect.
thank you for volunteering.
Excellent, thank you.
So when is our next meeting, by the way?
The 13th.
June 13th
Yeah,
at 6
Monday.
PM. So 3 weeks.
Okay. 3 weeks. And then do we have July and August set at this point?
No.
We do not.
No.
Available on the 4th.
I object. 4 weeks later is the 11th.
Well, we could do the
July 11th?
PBBC has a meeting on July 11th and 25th, so that would mean July 18th. That's a possibility.
That's.
I will be on vacation all of the week of, basically from the 16th to the 30th. So it'd be ideal if we could do something before the 16th.
The week of the 11th would be ideal for me as well. If we can do it.
Well, it could not be on a Monday night.
The
At
13th,
least not
Wednesday?
me and Hank.
So the Monday is the 11th, is that?
Yeah.
Yes.
guess it's
The
Wednesday.
13th, Wednesday.
Wednesday, the 13th.
That's
Sure.
fine, I mean,
That works for me.
Sounds good.
Should we also
I
do
look forward to hearing
August,
that.
just so we
Yes.
get the summer month?
Is that at 6 or
I-
7?
I think we did 7 to 9, right? Or 7 to 9:30.
Or can we do 6 to 8?
Can we do 6 to 8? Do you have a Newari meeting?
I'm on vacation that week, so you guys can do
Okay.
whatever you want. I'm very excited,
Wow.
But you can do
Do
6
folks
to 8.
prefer, folks prefer 6 to 8 or 7 to 9?
6 days.
I think
6
for
days.
this, we can start earlier, it works out better.
6.
So,
Great.
I'm sorry,
They
that's the
snagged it before
13th.
CPC, so.
At what time, 6 o'clock?
Yes.
6 o'clock. You reserving it right now?
No,
Can we do August 15th? or something?
my time. I haven't
Back
set
to
it.
Mondays?
August 15th?
August 15th works between the PBBC meetings.
So
Also 6 to 8?
Wait, what day?
The 15th
Monday, the
of August?
15th.
Might go. You don't. The 16th?
15th, Monday the
15th,
15th.
yeah.
Six?
6 to 8.
6 to 8.
Good. And did you say Kate is coming to our next meeting? That's correct?
Yes.
Okay,
Municipal aggregation.
excellent. Okay,
And I think as you had stated, the select board needs, and maybe even town meeting need to support it by a vote before the process can initiate.
that's right. They need to authorize the select board to engage with a consultant, I believe is first step. All right. Should we do a motion to adjourn or we have anything else?
Rush.
I'll motion to adjourn.
Second.
Second.
Looks like everyone's in favor, they're leaving.
Aye.
Need a
Have a
roll
good,
call.
have a good week.
Bye, everyone.
Great job. Thanks.
All right, thanks,
Okay.
guys.
Quickly,
Bye-bye.
I think we did it. So they're done. That's their way. If it's a hybrid meeting,
Oh,
you need
yeah?
a roll call vote.
Yeah.
On all of them?
For hybrid and
No.
remote meeting,
For adjourning, right?
for any vote technically, but yeah. Actually, for all the votes. So here we did